You are listening to the APSE podcast, the Association of People Supporting Employment First, with your host, Chris Davies.
Okay, welcome back, everybody, to the Minnesota APSE video podcast. We've been on a little bit of summer break, you could say, for the last few months, but we're so glad to be back and very excited for our guest today. Everybody can see him there. That's Bob Niemick. Say hi, Bob.
Hi there.
And we will we'll formally introduce you, Bob, in all your glory here in just a moment. But before we do that, I'd like to just remind everybody a little bit about Minnesota APSE and the podcast series. This is our fifth video podcast, and we've already got some ideas for our next one in a month or two. And we appreciate, all you regular viewers and listeners, and anyone new, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. If you don't know much about the organization APSE, which as it happens, we're going to learn quite a bit about today, especially some of the origins and history. Bob has been involved in a lot of the early formations of APSE. We are an action-oriented organization. We exist to bring people together, to raise expectations so that people with disabilities can be employed, contribute, and assume their roles and responsibilities as citizens in their communities. We believe that employment is the same wage, standards, responsibilities, expectations, and opportunities available to any working age adult. One person at a time, employment is the avenue out of poverty and isolation. That is what we believe. And Bob, do those words sound familiar to you?
Sure do.
Yeah, they sure do. That is Minnesota APSE's purpose statement, and Bob actually was one of the people that was integral in writing that. We wrote it at a strategic planning session a few years back, and I remember Bob was there. So let's get on to meeting our guest today, Bob Niemick. What can I say? Or, I can't. If I said everything I wanted to say about Bob, and I mean positive things, of course, I would take the whole hour here. But I've known Bob for since 1997 when I started in the field, and Bob has been in the field for even longer than that. When did you actually start in the field, Bob?
1980.
1980. Okay, so Bob's been in the field since 1980. I've had the pleasure of working directly with him at Kaposia. When I started at Kaposia in 1997, I worked directly with Bob. And over the years, we've had the opportunity to work together on many micro as well as macro projects and sidebars, if you will. Bob has been a pioneer in the field of supported employment and now customized employment. He has impacted countless numbers of people in the field, professionals as well. I'm very happy to tell you that he is one of my key mentors, and I know I would not be sitting here talking to you if it wasn't for Bob. So welcome, Bob. Great to have you.
Thanks, Chris. That was really nice.
Absolutely. And current days, Bob is a trainer for Griffin Hamilton Associates and is also very well known as and renowned trainer, not only nationally, but internationally. Isn't that right, Bob?
Canada.
Singapore. Okay.
Spain.
They count.
So, yeah. So that counts.
They count. So let's get into it. I'm excited to learn from Bob today. I've heard some of the stories, but sometimes I feel like I'm hearing for the first time, and we're going to learn from Bob some of the early days, of supported employment and the formation of APSE, the Association for People Supporting Employment First. And, so tell us about those early days. In the 1980s, I was literally growing up. I was a teenager. I graduated from high school in 1987. And while I was doing all those things, you were a part of, some pretty special things with pretty special group of people. Tell us about those days, Bob.
Well, yeah. I'll just give one little piece of background, I think, for folks, and that is that my college degree is in technical theater. I, built scenery and lighted shows and worked professionally for quite a while before I accidentally got into this field, and which is a story that I like to share with people because I believe that careers are accidental for the most part. I mean, Chris, you could attest to that, but I got into this, in 1980 because a friend of mine, a guy that I knew, thought I might be good. So I did that, and I worked in sheltered workshop in southeastern Indiana, and then moved to Auburn, Alabama, where my wife was in grad school, and I worked at a school for people with disabilities on the Alabama-Georgia state line, and then was recruited to come up to a town called Anderson, Indiana, which is just a little bit north of Indianapolis, to run the workshop there. And what my friend, and he hired me to do that job as well, but what he knew was that my background and training in technical theater, required a lot of planning. It required, being able to put things together and to manage people. So he thought it would be a good fit. So I took that job. And it was a couple of years later that my friend Ron Rucker, who has passed away since, saw a guy named Lou Brown. And Lou Brown's an important guy. I mean, Lou was from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and he was part of that early vanguard of people that in the early 80s that helped conceive supported employment. And so Ron saw Lou, and Lou made a big impression on him. At that time, what Lou was talking about was something called a workshop without walls. And then later on, Madeline Will, who was the director of the Office of Special Ed and Rehabilitative Services, coined the term supported employment. And so when Ron was talking to me about this, that we had this workshop without walls, and people would go and work in regular jobs and all that, I said, "You're crazy. No, but that ain't going to happen." And I had all kinds of reasons why I didn't think that was going to happen. And so we had a pretty big workshop and a lot of industrial, kind of semi-industrial stuff. He sent me down to Miami to a niche conference, National Industries for the Severely Handicapped, and theoretically to learn how to bid on government contracts. That was sort of the ploy that he was using. I didn't know, And so I went down there, and it was a big deal. I mean, it was in Miami. It was, they really put out the dog, man. I'll tell you, it was a lot of military guys there and big shots, and so first class. But I went to an opening session that was presented by a guy named Bob Persky. And I don't know how many of the listeners or the viewers know who Bob Persky was, but he was an influential guy. And his wife drew pencil drawings of people, particularly with Down syndrome. I think he had a son or a daughter had Down syndrome. And anyway, so Bob Persky did this presentation at this conference of all these workshop guys, and he is talking about community-based stuff, or just the community. And I'm sitting there, with a cup of coffee and a donut or whatever, thinking, well, this guy's making a whole lot of sense, So it just sort of percolated for a while. Then later on in that conference, maybe even the same day, there was a general session in the afternoon that was one of those point counterpoint sessions, right? So, any of the people who watched the original editions of Saturday Night Live will understand the point counterpoint thing, or early 60 Minutes. So on the one side, you had this guy from a big workshop who had all this stuff going on, and he was making furniture for the government. And on the other side, you had Bob Persky. And in the hall was a big meeting room, like a ballroom, and it was two rows of chairs and an aisle down the middle. And on the one side, where this guy from the workshop was, that's where all the people were sitting. And on the other side, there was hardly anybody sitting there, right? And I was, of course, on the side with all the guys, right? Planning about what we're going to go out and drink that night, or something like that. And as the point counterpoint continued, I literally crossed over. I got up and walked over to the other side of the aisle. And then I got back to Indiana, and my boss Ron said, "Tell me about it." And I said, "I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. This is just really, this is wrong, or whatever." And he looked up at me and said, "I was hoping that would happen." So his whole goal was to kind of mess with my head and see what would happen. But anyway, so that was in maybe 1981, 82 or something. No, it's probably a little later than that, but doesn't matter. And then Ron took a job here in Minnesota, and at what was then called the Washington County Developmental Learning Center, which is a mouthful for a receptionist to answer the phone. And he called me up and he said, "Why don't you come up here and do this? Run this program, run the supported employment program." And we were living in a pretty not a progressive town in Indiana. There, just a few miles away from the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan, and so we thought, well, maybe it was time to get out of there, and so we moved to St. Paul and started a supported employment program, applied for a grant. So in 1984 and then 85, particularly, is when they really were awarded. I think it was 85, maybe 86. But anyway, there were these things called systems change grants, and I think 15 states, maybe more. I can't remember. Particularly, were awarded those grants, and Minnesota was one. So then individual organizations would apply to, primarily it was housed at Voc Rehab, to get a systems change grant. And so this was the introduction of supported employment, to Minnesota. And there were 5 recipients of those grants here in Minnesota. Rise Incorporated was one of them. We were Washington County, which later became Eastern Urban Resources. Kaposia was one. There was an organization in Wilmer, I think, and I can't remember who the 5th one was. But and so the deal was that they were bringing in all these people from all over the country, the thought leaders at the time, and we had access to all this training. So it's not just leadership that had access, but we could bring our staff, our job developers, and really begin the process of making this changeover, right, to this. And we adopted where I was, we adopted a one person at a time approach. We were the only ones that did that. We're not doing any group placement. We're not doing any sub-minimum wage, and we're going one person at a time. And that was just the way we wanted to do it. And we persevered and did it that way. At the time, the sort of the benchmarks that we were supposed to hit for individual job seekers was 20 hours a week at minimum wage or better. Okay.
And this is in 1985 you're talking, Bob, is that right?
86.
Still way ahead of, well, sadly to say, but way ahead of your time, but way overdue as well. Yeah.
And those benchmarks, like I said, it was 40 hours, 20 hours a week at minimum wage. And I realized later that wasn't an arbitrary number. 20 hours a week at minimum wage at that time kept somebody under SGA for Social Security. So it really had some design to it. And you know, so those are the targets, and we hit them. And then later on, so then this association called APSE, the Association for Persons in Supported Employment, emerged out of Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond. And Kathy McNulty, who was at Kaposia at the time, was on the original board. I got the newsletter and I said, this sounds pretty good. So we joined in like 1988. And so that began this whole process of broadening the you know, the scope and the reach of what was happening in supported employment. And like I said, it was 20 hours a week, minimum wage or better, and we hit that. The first APSE conference was in Denver in 1990. And they had a session there, and it was a guy from RSA who was doing the session. And what was happening was the rehab counselors, the PR counselors, were reluctant to use their money for supported employment, even though they could, because this notion that a job might not be permanent, right? That somebody might get a job and decide, you know, I don't like this job, or they lose it for whatever reason, and they're coming back, you know, and that just didn't happen in those days. And so they created a whole separate funding pot for supported employment called Title VI. And when the Title VI, stuff was initiated, it also eliminated that 20-hour-a-week minimum wage requirement. And it said something more like it had to make sense for the individual in their individual, the IWRP, the individual written rehabilitation plan. And so somebody could get a job and work for an hour a week at sub-minimum wage, and that was going to be okay. Wasn't okay with me. And so, and for some folks, it's just other, you know, and that wasn't just you and me, you know, feeling that way. A lot of people did, and so many of them were at APSE. And so so APSE was really a fledgling organization, and that conference in Denver was really monumental because it was at a hotel called the Adams Mark, which was a big hotel. So this is 1990, right? And the whole, you know, Denver's obviously changed a lot downtown, but it was one. If you're familiar with Denver, there's a 16th Street, which runs from this hotel all the way to Coors Field, where the Rockies play, and it's a pedestrian mall that runs it. There's a shuttle, like a trolley that runs by, you can catch and all that. But anyway, so it's a big hotel, and APSE was the only organization doing anything at that particular hotel. So there were, I think, 300 people registered, and what happened was they had 300 walk-ups. So I mean, think about that. I mean, wow. just the logistical nightmare of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Well, fortunately, because the hotel was a conference center kind of place, they had extra space, and so then it became, with the APSE leadership going around saying, who can do this, who can do that, right? I mean, so they're recruiting people to, you know, do ad lib sessions, essentially, extemporaneous, you know, that kind of thing. I wasn't one of them. I was just a guy there, you know, trying to figure it out. And but it was such a powerful experience, because you'd go to a session, somebody'd be there. Maybe it was David Mank, maybe it was Dale DeLeo, you know, I mean, Tom Bellamy or Paul Wayman, you know, the big shots, or the guys that were the real thought leaders doing a session, and you go in there, or somebody else who figured something out was sharing that with them. And somebody would ask a question, right, in the group, and you'd say, well, that was a good question, I'm going to go find that guy, right? And so as the sessions broke up and people were in the hallways and such, between times and sessions, you'd go find that person and you have a conversation. It was like, I'm not prone to do that kind of stuff. I'm not Chris, right? Chris has never met a stranger. I mean, he can just talk to anybody and make you feel comfortable. I play an extrovert sometimes when I'm doing training, but it takes a lot of effort for me to go talk to strangers one-on-one, that kind of thing. But it was but that was sort of what happened was it created this atmosphere that lingered. So the next conference was in San Diego and although they did a better job of planning and having 600-700 people or something like that, I don't know, that sort of the way that's how it happened. People just went and found each other. They had the social events and the area where the vendors are and bars, of course. People would go in there and talk and just exchange ideas, and that's sort of how a lot of us got our value set, our principles, and even then techniques about how do you do this, because almost everybody had come out of the workshop world, and so we knew that, and we were trying to figure out how we could do this new different thing, right? And the beauty of it was, so at East Suburban Resources, where I was, we had the grant two times, and in the first year when we were applying for the grant, so well, how many people do you think we should say we're going to find jobs, right? We've never done this before, so we didn't want to aim crazy high, but we didn't want to lowball it, right? So I said, well, one a month sounds pretty good, right? How's that? And so we figured it'd be 10 because of when the grant started. At the end of that first year, it was 29. And then so we got to the next year of the grant, and it said, well, what are we going to do this time? I said, well, we ain't doing 29 because I think we were lucky, So let's say 15 more. And of course, at the end, it was 50. And so
Bob,
so
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm a little surprised that so you must have been a little more pessimistic as a younger person, Sky's the limit when it comes to customized employment now.
Well, I don't know if I was pessimistic, Chris. We didn't have the we didn't have the capacity. We were building the capacity, and we really didn't know what to do. Seriously. And the beauty of it was, this was at the time when in Minnesota, they had just created something called Rule 38, which was
right.
the DT&H licensing rule.
Right.
Prior to that, day training places, which were called DACs, were really licensed under a like a daycare rule.
Sure.
So they created this Rule 38 to do the licensing stuff, but they really had no measure, right? I mean, they didn't know what to do with supported employment because it didn't exist before. And so that was sort of a liberating kind of thing, because there was there were constraints. We still had vulnerable adult law and stuff like that.
Sure.
Still had to manage your money, but programmatically, it was new territory.
Mm-hmm.
No one had been there before.
Yeah.
And so I think that we collectively the field, we got away with a lot of stuff that you could not do now because we got regulators and whose main job is to stifle innovation and not foster it. So
Right.
so anyway, so those sorts of things sort of kind of happened. The grant in Minnesota lasted until 1991. And when it ended, a lot of people who were part of that grant, who would go to those trainings, I was at the POJA at the time, we would continue to host meetings and have people come, and and we'd share our stories with each other. But then we also thought about, man, I really miss having all those really cool trainers come through here. How could we organize? Because no one organization could afford anything like that. How could we pool our resources and do that? And that was the genesis of Minnesota APSE. Minnesota, an APSE, national APSE, launched the idea of state chapters then. And we thought, well, that sounds like a pretty good idea. So we went to the conference in San Diego and began that process of creating what was then called MAPSE.
So was Minnesota one of the in the first sort of group of state chapters?
Yeah, first
yeah. And
three.
Was that the quote unquote MAPSE watch you're holding up for everybody there?
There it is.
Oh,
the
wow,
watch.
Wow, excellent, great visual aid.
An artifact.
Way to prepare. Way to have the artifacts. I love it.
Yeah,
do you have any scrolls or anything?
Parchment?
Do you have any scrolls or anything chiseled into stone for us? Or
oh no, I don't. I do have a bunch of old newsletters, so I'll share those with you guys sometime. But anyhow, so that was the genesis of our state chapter, and so we had the paperwork and all that kind of stuff that we had to do to apply to be a state chapter was pretty simple and benign back then, because again, nobody knew what to do, right? And so there weren't a lot of models to choose from, and so we did all that. So we're going to have an organizational meeting where we had to elect officers and do all that stuff, right? And I was doing a training session up in International Falls, up north. And
was it February?
It was November.
That's cold enough.
Yeah, you bet it was. And in the process of coming back, my appendix burst. And however, I didn't know this. I mean, I felt terrible, but it abscessed, which means that the bile or whatever didn't get into my body. It sort of stayed there, which is, I probably would have died. I really might, with that. And so
extremely fortunate.
So I had to go to the hospital because we're right around Thanksgiving, so I missed out on Thanksgiving dinner, and we're at the hospital here in Maplewood, and so I had to stay there for a couple of days. And Jackie Minarczyk, who was the CEO at Kaposia at the time, came to visit me. And I said, how'd it go? How'd the meeting go? And she goes, well, I have some good news and some other news. I said, tell me the good news. She said, well, it went really well. We had these people, we had folks we didn't even know, they were great and all that kind of stuff. Said, okay, what's the other news? You got elected president. Oh, I see. Okay. And I was telling Chris a couple of, we were swapping stories, and that then became sort of a model for how we operated as Minnesota APSE. If you were on the board and you missed a meeting, you got a job, right? And it got to the point where people would call me and say, hey, I'm going to have to miss the board meeting. What's my job? And it'd be like conference chair. You're the conference chair now, or
right.
You're the editor of the newsletter. I mean, just stuff like that. And it was, it was tongue in cheek, right? But it was serious. You had to do it. And so at that time, there was no combined membership. So you're either a national member, you could be a state chapter member without being a national member. And so what we did is if we held events, we would charge non-members $15 more than current members. And with that $15 more, you became a member. So at one point we had like 150, almost 200 members. And then APSE changed its approach to doing a combined membership, and that kind of dropped our membership off. But I think Minnesota APSE has rebounded fairly well over the years to do that. So anyway, that's kind of the fast story about how it happened.
Well, so much there. And it's really, I think, for anybody that might not know much about Minnesota APSE and National APSE, and even those of us that think we do know more, that just the information you've given us so far, Bob, is like gold. That it's really important as well as interesting history. So thanks for laying that out. And I was thinking about the way you were describing the conferences in the early days, how people just started to have conversations, and you sort of realized these people think the way I think. I remember the first national conference I went to, and I was awestruck to see hundreds of people from around the country and around the world, for that matter, who believed that people with disabilities should be working in the community, should be working in their own jobs like everyone else, should be making wages that are also like their coworkers and people they work with. And to see that and feel that energy, I think it was very similar to those early days, because that's what I remember the most, are the people I meet and the conversations I have. And I would always leave a national conference with a stack of cards from my new friends from all over the place.
Oh yeah. And the other thing about it too, Chris, was that there was an air of humility about it. Nobody would tell you that they knew what to do. They would tell you that they're working on it, right? It's like, we're not there yet, but we're on the way. We're doing it. And some people were further along than others, but people were happy to admit it. In fact, I don't think I mentioned this when we talked with Dana, but the third conference in Baltimore, well, they created something called a delegates council, where their state chapter people would be on this council that would kind of advise the board. And so I was on that first delegates council. And as we're talking, and then the guys at Minnesota APSE were talking, we noticed that at TASH, which wasn't a rival organization, was just different.
And what does TASH stand for, Bob?
It stood for the Association for the Severely Handicapped.
Okay.
And then but so much of TASH was academic. I mean, people who were doing master's programs and PhDs and all that, they would present their papers, as the presentation. So it wasn't very exciting, and all that. And if you looked at the program, the conference program, you looked at the presenter list, everybody had just a ton of letters behind their names. And so those of us in the trenches go, screw that, we want to be an organization of people who do the work.
Right.
And so we created a petition and presented it to Wendy Wood, who was the director at the time, and the board, that there would be no letters behind anybody's names. Because if you were like me and the people that I associated with and worked with, we didn't give a rip if you had a PhD. Can you do the work, right? Have you been there? Have you experienced stuff that you're going to experience? And that lasted for quite a long time. I think APSE has sort of backtracked a little about that. And I think it's because at one time one of the directors had a PhD, and so there you go. But like Chris was talking about going to the conference, and I would say, show me the program, right? I don't know if I did this for you, and I would highlight, go see this guy, go see her, don't go there. That person doesn't know what the hell they're talking about, right? And that kind of thing, so that they could be exposed to people who could tell them the right stuff, right? They give them the good thoughts. So that's sort of how a lot of that worked out.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's a tradition that's kind of continued into my work as well. Can you just tell us, I'd like to take a few moments for you to talk a little bit about the challenges, as supported employment. The idea of supported employment was truly being born and practiced. What were some of the key challenges you ran into in the early days?
Well, like I said, most of us had cut our teeth in the shelter work system. So we knew that system. And one of the things that the shelter work system offers organizationally is an economy of scale, right? So you got one staff person who's supervising a work group of half a dozen people, right? And so in supported employment, even if you were doing an enclave or something like that, you were still reducing that ratio.
Sure.
And so that was one that people say, well, this doesn't make any financial sense. And your reply, our reply was, sell your building, that kind of thing. I mean, get rid of stuff and invest your money in people. Sure. So that was one. Secondly was, and probably more so than anything, Chris, was just a belief that people with disabilities could, could do anything if you had the right support. And of course, the naysayers would say, well, what about this person, and they present you with the most extreme complication of disability you can imagine. Say, what are you going to do with that guy? And, reply was, I don't know, but the moment I say he can't, then I need to quit.
That's right.
I need, this is not the field for me.
That's and it's not a can't field.
No, it's not. And if you think about it now, I mean, from 1986, 1985 until right now, think about the advances in technology that we've experienced, not to mention the stuff that my parents experienced in the 50s, but we've experienced a ton just in the last 30 some years.
Absolutely.
And so who knows, right? And I've always believed this, and I have no evidence to prove it, but I believe it, that people, even with the most significant cognitive disabilities and that information is getting in, it's just not getting back out, right? In a way that meets some standard, whatever that is. Right. So the challenge is, how do you figure out how to get it out? How to because like if you got somebody who's 50 years old and they've been in a pretty like invalid state or whatever, they've still been watching stuff, they're still experiencing stuff, they know things, so we don't know what's in there, so that's been one of the kind of a driving thing. So that belief system is probably primary.
That's why, sorry to interrupt you, but that's why it's always bothered me when, and it still does, when somebody says, well, somebody's age, intellectual age is this. First of all, I don't believe in that type of language or description, but at the same time, I don't know too many 6-year-olds that have 30 years of life experience. And so there's just no way you can, I just wanted to sort of reiterate your point that people have life experience, and that counts for more than we really know how to quantify.
Well, and that mental age thing is just a made up number anyway.
Absolutely.
It's like IQ, some made up number. If anybody here who's on the video knows who Mark Gold was, go read his. He had one of his books was called "Did I Say That?" And what he did was he talked about things he used to believe and now what he believes. Right, the sort of the crossover in thinking, which is something I experienced and a lot of my colleagues did too. And that was part of it, was that believing that testing told you anything. That kind of stuff. So there was that. The system too. I mean, like I said, we were getting away with stuff that we couldn't get away with now.
Sure.
But there was always this kind of waiting to get caught. Thing. They're going to catch us. Oh no, what's going to happen? And we weren't doing anything illegal. We were just doing stuff that wasn't on the books. I mean, it wasn't on in the lexicon of all that nonsense that they had, that paperwork. What I always said is quality assurance things, certifications and that mean nothing. They mean nothing. What happens is, can you do it? All right, can you do it? And there's really not many ways academically that's going to teach you how to do it, because what they settle on becomes obsolete really quickly. And in order to change curriculum, it's like a rigmarole, man, I'll tell you. Whereas we could be nimble, we could shift on the fly. We could say, oh, that doesn't work anymore, let's stop doing it, right? Or let's do this kind of thing. So those are some of them, Chris. I mean, you know, parents too were, a lot of parents were really nervous about their sons and daughters, and feeling that they weren't sure how safety was going to be. You know, what is safety? So those were some of the stuff, and we had to address it. We really were stupid at the beginning. We tried to address it broadly, and you can't, right? You got to address it individually. Got to address it one at a time, and that takes a lot of work. And that's another reason of the barriers. It's different kind of work,
right,
by different kind of people. You know, so.
And it's you know, for me, who been in the field now 24 years, what I know, it's hard to believe. Feels like just yesterday I met you, and I was in my 20s. So,
now it's in my 30s.
there you go. But the you know, one thing I've noticed is as there has been certainly lots of advances and you know, more adaptation of the belief of, you know, integrated community-based employment, one person at a time. There still has always been the other side that doesn't you know, that, I don't know, is having a harder time letting go. So as we've continued to see advancements, we've also continued not to see advancements, which is, you know, well, I guess interesting phenomenon. That's one word for it. But yeah, so it's you know, on that note of growth, though, on that side of growth, you know, when I did meet you, there was, you know, continued innovations and ideas and more adaptation. Maybe you can talk to us about some of those, you know, from the late 90s into the 2000s, and you know, maybe leading up to even the employment first, you know, type of ideas that you were an integral part of.
Well, you know, the thing was that while the supported employment grants were in place nationally, and that was from like 85 to 90, 91, that kind of thing, participation in supported employment went from nobody to about 140,000 people nationally. And when the grants ended, it stayed there. It didn't decline, it just didn't grow, right? What did grow was non-work community stuff, like, you know, sanding ducks or whatever the heck you do in a workshop. And, you know, that kind of stuff grew. And, you know, and I was a director, you know that, Chris. I was a director of an agency, and I was executive director of an agency. I was not popular among my peer group, because what I would tell my peers is, you guys are just lazy, right? You are intellectually and organizationally lazy. And so I don't have time for it. And they were happy to say, see ya. Okay, all right, well, good. Now I get to keep my dues, and I'll send people to training. But, you know.
Well, we still love you.
I really do believe that. And there are some organizations who are not nationally, you know, they're rare. They really are. I mean, there are people who are doing bits of it, doing parts of it, but they haven't gone all in, right? It's like Texas Hold'em, right? No all ins over there. And so so the 90s and even the first part of, you know, the 2000s was kind of a grind. There wasn't a lot of new stuff going on. Technology was helping, you know, laptops and computers and things were exploding on the scene. That was a big help. You know, the internet had not really blossomed yet, and so their email was not a thing. But so so that and also in the 90s, particularly in the late 90s, the employment rate, particularly in Minnesota, was 3%. Unemployment rate was 3%, which means it's full employment.
I remember that.
So you could just throw a dart somewhere at a place and go get somebody a job. They didn't stay in the job, but you could do it, right? And so we had that. Plus, the economy just exploded, and people left. Staff left. They went. Say, I can make more money at being a waitress, and I can make more money doing this, and I don't have all that the angst and aggravation that you're going to get from the work that we do. You get a lot of satisfaction, but you got to balance it with the hard work. And so what happened, and I know experienced it at Kapoja as director of training, is that our standards for who we hired changed. They really lowered, and so we had we wound up having a lot of people that we would not have hired 5 years ago, 5 years prior to that, or and even some now that there's that experience is happening again. Some of it because of COVID, and creating the employment conundrum that we're all in. So but then excuse me, we just moved along, right? And I took a job at community involvement programs. We built an employment program based on one at a time, regular wages, all the things that I believe, and had some really good people working there, and some former APSE, Minnesota APSE presidents, and really good folks who had good brains, to figure stuff out. And so we moved along, but yet it was still not, just wasn't what I was hoping for, right? I just thought, my gosh, it's here it is, we're 2016 or 15 or whatever, and we're no better off than we were in 2000, in terms of numbers and all that. And so I went to lunch with a couple of icons, John Alexander and Don Lavin. And we went out to lunch, and we're just having lunch, and Don was getting more involved. He had sort of taken a hiatus, but now he was getting more involved. And I said, what would be great? So what if we invited just a bunch of people that we know, we trust, that can think about this stuff, and we pose the question, how can we move this forward? How can we move this forward? Just like 150, so whatever, statewide, we'll just do that. How can we do this? And Don said, well, I just came back from something like that in Indiana,
right?
And they called it an employment first thing. And he was there as a presenter, and he did that. And he talked a little bit about the format. Well, I'm from Indiana, and I know all those people in Indiana. And so I called them up and I said, what'd you guys do? Tell us a little bit about it. And so not only did they tell us what they did, but they told us what they wish they had done, which was great, right? So we said, oh, well, okay, well, let's do that. And that's how Employment First was born in Minnesota.
Sure. And
literally was the sort of the comet that shot out of Minnesota that influenced the rest of the country. They absolutely wasn't talking about Employment First at all. They didn't even know what it was, and we didn't know what it was, but we knew it wasn't what we were doing. And so that's how Employment First happened. We had the Employment First conference, and we formed a coalition. I invited people that I thought would be really good planners, and we're going to buy in. And we got support from the Medicaid Infrastructure Grant, Mary Alice Mowry. We had some support from the Department of Ed, Jane Spain, who said, I've got like $10,000 I need to spend. We said, well, we can help you.
Yeah.
We can help you do that, So we had, in 2016, $15,000 was like a fortune,
Absolutely.
And so we did it out at the Minnesota Arboretum.
Yes, I was there. I remember.
And from that, we recorded everything that people said and tried to organize it. So I know Alex worked at organizing it thematically. Don started doing some of the narrative. My job was, because I live in a household of women who would correct me, that I have to have good grammar and stuff like this. So I would be like the grammar guy, to be sure that sentences made sense and those kinds of things. And we created the report. And And so that was in June where we did this conference. In January, it was ready to go. And so we had a party at Chris's house, actually.
I remember that.
Like a coming out party, right?
Yeah.
And we put a PDF of that Employment First report on the Minnesota APSE website. And by the end of the week, it had been downloaded 5,000 times.
Wow.
And so we said, well, that's something we didn't expect, you know?
Yeah.
And we sent it to every state, we sent it to every legislator, and that was kind of the thing. And so for me, you know, I have to admit it, you know, okay, I'm an old guy and all that kind of stuff, is that the daggone thing was my idea. You know? And nobody ever says, hey, thanks for that idea. No, that's okay. You know, I can live with it. I have other successes in my
Hey,
life.
Bob.
Yeah.
Thanks for that idea.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So, what else? And so that's what happened. And then, you know, I'm sorry, but customized employment emerged really in the early 2000s. You know, right up 9/11 happened, and it was the year before the Minnesota APSE hosted the national conference. So nobody was traveling, so we just took a bath, national organization, on that. And but what was happening at that time was that at the Department of Labor, there was this conversation about customized employment. And what customized employment was, and like the original guys like Mike Callahan and Rich Looking, those guys, they'll argue with me, but I don't care. You know, I've been around as long as they have. So, you know, and is that it's not supported employment on steroids. It's what we envisioned as supported employment. One person, regular wages, regular businesses, you know, and individualized support, whatever that meant. And so you couldn't have a sub minimum. You could not have a group placement. You could not have somebody working in a place that was owned by a rehab facility. You know, those kinds. So it kept the targets pure, right? Whereas in supported employment, you could do sub minimum, you could do groups and enclaves. You didn't have to have. There was no you know, hour commitment about how many times, you know, stuff like that. And so that started happening, and again, that made more sense to me. And so when I got to community involvement programs, it was about that time in 2003 when I went, okay, I think we'll try to figure out how to do this. And fortunately, I had been friends with Kerry Griffin, who was one of the preeminent minds in customized supported employment. And he and I were friends, and I said, hey, got anything you can send me, you know, that we can work out? And because of my having been nationally involved in a lot of different things, I knew a lot of people.
Sure.
And so I would trade them. I would say, you come and do a thing for my team, and I'll come and do one for you, right? And so we bartered like that, which was again, it was fun, you know. And Chris came and did a thing for us at CIP, drank an egg or something like that. I don't know, but yeah. So anyway, that's sort of a condensed version of it, you know. And but there's a lot more detail there. But if I get down to that detail, we're done.
Oh yeah, we'll be done. And what Bob's alluding to, everybody, is I had a former life, although I would certainly do it again. It's just not what I market so much anymore. But I was a motivational, inspirational speaker, and I developed a routine. And Bob was good enough in my early days when I was trying to really hone my craft to have me come out and speak to his organization there at CIP. And I was, you know, experimenting with my openings. And yeah, I did. I didn't actually drink the egg, though. I just made it look like I was going to drink it, and then I put it down because, I would just throw up all over the first row if I did that.
But it was a good ploy, Chris. It was a good.
Thank. I was all about getting your attention, which is key. Which is key. Yeah. So, well, yes, and you know, I just want to just go back real quickly and just talk a little bit more about employment first, because that idea that you had truly not and the idea for a coalition was what really took employment first and made it more than just about one sector of people believing in this idea.
Yeah.
To where we are now with an actual employment first policy in the state of Minnesota, with a Department of Human Services that uses employment first language and you know, sort of perpetuates that idea that that truly employment should be, you know, what employment first says is that it should be the first and expected outcome. So people really, with employment first, people aren't opting into employment, they're opting out of employment. We should expect everybody should and can work. And it changes our paradigm of how we look at our children. You know, children are children, and we should expect all of our children that someday they will grow up and have jobs and have lives and full lives.
Yeah, well, and you know, and I don't think there's going to be anybody here on this video. I know you didn't, and I sure as heck didn't have a conversation with my father where the notion that employment was an option was ever discussed. Right.
Exactly.
You know, he would get me jobs. He'd give me one of my first jobs to get me out of the house because I was driving my mother crazy, you know. So get out of here, get, you know, this 15-year-old, 16-year-old.
That's right.
So we started early with that expectation. It wasn't about people with disabilities, it's about people, adults. That's what you're supposed to do. So yeah, well, and I want to be sure that's clear. I did not invent employment first. I don't know who did, but I adopted that term to do what we were doing in Minnesota,
right?
Which launched like the sort of, you know, national thing. So I don't want to take any credit for that. I wish I had, but I don't.
But you did invent the universe. Let's just be clear about that.
Well, at least the one I'm in.
I say the same thing about myself. I've got my own sky. You know, that's for sure. Well, you know, we are. Bob and I, you know, as we've already told the audience, we've known each other for 27 years. We've collaborated in lots of different things, not just work, in lots of different things. So we could literally go on for hours, I'm sure, with this discussion. But let's just briefly talk, just to sort of take us towards our end here today. What do you expect? I'd really be curious to hear what your thoughts are on customized employment, if you will, in general, and services, you know, say for the next 10, 15 years, where do you see things going?
Yeah, well, I don't know that I can answer that part of it, the crystal ball part of it, but I can tell you what it needs, what I think it needs. It needs what it had back in the early 80s and late 80s and early 90s, and that is leadership. And this stuff happened at ESR in Washington County because Ron Rucker wanted it to happen and he was in charge. It happened at Kaposia because Jackie Menarzik was in charge and she made it happen. It happened in it happened at CIP because I was in charge. And so leaders have to emerge, right? Leaders have to, can't sit on the sidelines, right? You know, you got to get in there and you gotta, and so that's part of it. And because I believe that this is not a bottom-up thing, because the bottom has very little power unless it's completely organized, and unfortunately it's not. So it has to be a top-down thing. You know, one of the things that I've always believed, and it drives me crazy, is that all this effort and all this focus is on direct service people, and they are doggone it important. They don't get paid enough. They have a hard job to do, but it's focused on them with certifications and CESP and ACRE and all this stuff. There is not a single certification for an executive director. There's not a single certification other than a degree for a financial director, right? So, or, you know, so why is that, right? When the people who are calling the shots, and I've encountered them both in my career as a director and as my career as a consultant, they're just not going to do it. You know, they're just, it challenges their paradigm and they're just not going to do it. So I think that grow as a leader and get into a position where you can make something happen. you know, and I'm not saying don't try to change something that's really set in its ways. It's just going to take a lot longer to do that.
Sure.
So, you know, and same with people, you know, work with the willing. When we formed the Employment First Coalition, Chris, we called it a coalition of the willing.
Yeah.
So it's not about, even really seriously in terms of doing this, it's not about skill, it's about will. And if you've got the will, you'll learn the skill. And I don't mean to be, you know, Jesse Jackson like here, you know, but I'm saying that's the way it really is. And you can learn stuff, you know. When we hired people, we always used to say, we hire who's, we'll teach them what.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
And so we wanted to know that what made that person tick. Right. So anyway, so that's what I think, Chris. It just, I think there needs to be an effort. I think Minnesota APSE can play a huge role in developing future leaders, but not do it with some formula, right? Like hire, bring in some guy who says, I have got the leadership training. Run away from that guy, okay? Really, and find somebody who's got dirty hands, metaphorically, right?
Yes.
Find somebody who's, you know, got calluses. That's who you want to talk with, right?
Yeah.
And build from there. And anything I could do to help you all do that, I am happy to do as a mostly retired person. Find something to do, right?
But still very vibrant and influential, and you have so many great ideas, Bob. Yeah, you know, I agree. I mean, it just takes, you know, it's one person at a time, and it takes one leader at a time, and the more leaders, the more quote unquote doers we have, and the more people saying the right things, it only creates more opportunities for people to get truly good services and get good jobs. And I do see, you know, as somebody who is very much, I guess you could say, in the trenches as a leader, in a leadership position with an organization that believes in employment first and customized employment. There are starting to, you know, I am starting to see other organizations more than I saw 20 years ago. We still need more. We still need more. To really to make employment first a reality, we need as many people we can that truly believe in people and can help people get to those places. Because it's still, you know, when people come to me to learn about our services, for example, it still makes me sad that so many people truly haven't even heard of these concepts of, oh, wow, my son or daughter can have a real job, or the individual themselves telling me, wow, nobody's ever said that to me before. So, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing, Chris, is among that leadership development stuff is the concept of a cohort, right? It actually became a cohort. It was a international cohort of people who knew each other, right? And could talk to each other. I could call any of those guys up, they could call me up, and we could talk, you know, and locally, you know, that cadre was smaller.
Sure.
There weren't as many people in that. There were some, and like you said, it's growing some, you know, about time, you know, it's growing some. And but yeah, that's and I'd want to thank you and Kapoja, obviously, for your continued, you know, unwavering commitment to it. I think it's really something to see, and I am proud to have been a small part of it. So
well, thank you, Bob, and you know, thank you for your time here today with our Minnesota APSE video podcast, and thank you for those kind words. You know, when I came into the field, going back to what you said at the beginning, it was a happy accident. And I happened to come to work for an organization that had tremendous leadership and tremendous principles and beliefs. And one thing that I always remember that I heard you say in a training, it was when we worked together at Kapoja, and you were doing just a training on, you know, job development is probably what we were calling it at the time. But I was a job developer, and I just remember you saying to the group, Okay, so what do you think is the most important tool you can have as a job developer? What's the most important tool you can have? And I'm not sure if any of us shouted out the right answer or the answer right away, but I remember you saying the most important thing, and you said this earlier, is to believe. And I have used that dogma, or I have repeated that dogma many times with our employees today. You know, whenever I meet with a new employee that we hire, I tell them that story. I talk about how, you know, the most important thing is to believe that you're going to learn all these, how to dot these I's and cross these T's and all the regulation stuff that you're talking about, Bob. But the most important thing is to believe. And that's, you know, at Kaposia and with APSE, the first and foremost is that we believe in people, that all people should be treated with dignity and respect. All people have value. All people have a place in the working world. So,
Yeah.
you know, thank you for that. Thank you for all your years of friendship and inspiration.
You're
And
welcome.
I can speak on behalf of so many people that I know. I could literally just start rattling off names of people that you've influenced that are in leadership roles, you know, big time roles, and trying to change the world. And you know, so just thanks again, and thank you to the audience for listening and
Yep, thanks for having me.
coming in. Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, I'll just this is Chris and Davies, and on behalf of Bob Niemick, we're signing off, and I just want to remind everybody out there once again that if you believe it, you can achieve it.
There you go.